Hello everyone, it's Wednesday, June 6th, and my name is Doran Hodge. Welcome to Global Beat Radio, the radio show of the students of the Institute on Globalization and the Human Condition at McMaster University. Welcome to part 2 of a special episode. On Monday, May 28th, the Institute on Globalization and the Human Condition held an annual MRP colloquium. During this colloquium, Globalization M.A. students discussed their major research projects, including their topics, their interests in these topics, and their research to date. The purpose of the colloquium was for students and their supervisors to offer suggestions and feedback to one another regarding their research. Due to the interdisciplinary nature of the Globalization program, the only criteria for students to follow was that their papers relate to globalization in some form. What follows is a discussion of 4 of these MRP projects. First, Allie Crowder discusses her work. Second, Leila Mash and Nicole Rallis discuss their work in Hamilton, Ontario. Finally, Shawn Pittman discusses his work related to land grabbing.
Hi, my name's Allie Crowder, and I will be writing my MRP on the topic of climate change, as I, along with many others, consider it to be the most pressing issue facing humanity in the 21st century. Of course, we were also faced with this issue in the 20th century, but given our lack of action in effectively dealing with the problem, coupled with our increasing carbon emissions, we now find ourselves at a critical point where climate change is already happening, but we still have a chance to mitigate some of its effects and prevent it from spiraling past the point of no return. Back in 2000, Nobel-winning chemist Paul J. Crutzen proposed, in collaboration with Eugene F. Stormer, a marine science specialist, that we had entered a new geological epoch, which they termed the Anthropocene, and this refers to the already marked and growing ecological impacts that human activities were having on the Earth and our atmosphere. In this way, humans, and more precisely our industrial activity, are now recognized as a geological force with the potential to produce severe environmental consequences. So this very much describes my position that I will be talking about in my MRP. The fact that global warming is the result of carbon-based capitalism, or what others such as Lewis Mumford have referred to as carboniferous capitalism, which is anthropogenic in nature, but we have the opportunity to effect positive change in an attempt to prevent the worst from happening, if only we would invest our collective will into doing so. Ever since a young age, I've been interested in environmental issues. So now that we have reached what I consider to be a crossroads of the Anthropocene, the point at which a vital decision must be made, the topic of climate change was a clear choice for my MRP. And while this line of argument is not exclusive to Naomi Klein, it was in reading her article, Capitalism versus the Climate, that the links were put together in such a way that identified the premise from which my MRP would begin. Specifically, this refers to the fact that what is being resisted by our lack of investment in redressing the wrong of climate change is not necessarily the prospect of taking action against it, but rather the fundamental transformation in international political and economic ideology which this would entail, and the societal transformations that this would necessitate, extending all the way to the individual level and essentially demanding a new civilizational paradigm. We currently live in a time where overconsumption and a short-term planning are all the norm, where cognitive dissonance and corporate greed present barriers to achieving the momentum that we need to turn things around. Thus, from a contextual perspective, neoliberalism is seen as a barrier at the macro level, with a range of social structures and psychological dispositions supporting the prerogative that these market mechanisms create. Understandably, the idea of tackling such an expansive and overwhelming problem can be deflating, and there is no shortage of more imminent social issues to distract us, in the meantime, which are equally deserving of attention. But as Naomi Klein suggests, this deliberate attempt to shift cultural values is not a distraction from the real struggles. In the rocky future we have already made visible, an unshakable belief in the equal rights of all people and a capacity for deep compassion will be the only thing standing between humanity and barbarism. Climate change, by putting us on a firm deadline, can serve as the catalyst for precisely this profound social and ecological transformation. So, my main research question will ask, how we can motivate the political will that is necessary to address climate change, but also the social will that is necessary to accept the decisions that government will make once they start making them. However, in providing an answer to this, some of the main problems standing in the way will need to be examined. Of course, there are powerful interests which are opposed to reform, since the redistribution of wealth, higher taxes, and greater government intervention and regulation of industry are antithetical to our current neoliberal model. For this reason, action in addressing climate change needs to be both top-down and bottom-up, because individuals need to be on board in order to push their governments into action, but also to accept the changes that are required. And in order for this to occur, the gap between public and scientific understanding needs to be bridged, as science is embedded in a broader cultural pattern that determines the way in which knowledge and politics interact. But it's not only about the science-policy interface, it's also about the cultural change, as well as changing the science system itself. Individuals need to be empowered to show that their efforts matter and that they are making a difference and not simply being cancelled out by those who choose not to adjust their lifestyles. In order for this to be possible, more people need to adjust to living within a low-carbon economy, which is the transition that is identified by almost every author on the subject as being the necessary objective. So in part, knowledge about energy alternatives could likely facilitate a self-motivating momentum on the part of individuals, and support from government, industry, and science in terms of subsidies, leadership, and innovation would all prove to be indispensable. In considering some of the main forms of social and political inaction, which will comprise the first part of my research question, I will be examining a variety of perspectives that are both practically and theoretically informed, including potential responses from psychology, as well as influences that prevent action, which are mainly identified within the realm of politics, ideology, and corporate interests. So this section will cover various forms of inaction at personal, collective, national, and international levels. The second part of my research question will move from having identified some of the main contributing factors to asking what it is we can do or what needs to be done in order to effect meaningful action that will work towards reducing carbon emissions, thereby preventing climate change from worsening and accelerating. And the reason I focus on carbon is because it is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, comprising about 75% of global emissions, mostly coming from China and the US, who are the two largest emitters. Some of the answers which can be offered by the research I've completed to date point to the fact that certain variables need to be met in order for the public to be on board, which is an important part of both influencing government action as well as accepting government initiatives. For example, government legitimacy and trust have been identified by various authors as necessary conditions for generating the capacity to change, but are not considered to be sufficient in and of themselves. In a book called From Climate Change to Social Action, Processes Across Disciplines, Organizing Dual Responsibility, as well as Strengthening and Institutionalizing the Reflective Capacity of Organizations and Systems within Civil Society, are all identified as being factors contributing to steps towards effective action. In the end, climate change challenges capitalism to find a new way to grow while gradually replacing coal, oil, and gas, and to move past the ideological preference for markets over state-led economic planning, which has shaped climate change policies that have all too often been taken for granted. In this regard, questions of moving beyond what John Urry refers to as the carbon military-industrial complex, and toward a post-carbon or decarbonized society will be integral. To this end, some of the main questions posed in a book entitled Climate Capitalism, Global Warming and the Transformation of the Global Economy will likely inform the concluding sections, where they ask which powerful actors might be brought on board to overcome resistance from the oil and coal companies. And for those of us worried about the image of unbridled free market capitalism as managing the climate for us, the question then becomes, what type of climate capitalism do we want?
Hi, we're Leila Mash and Nicole Rallis from the Institute on Globalization and the Human Condition.
And we're making a documentary exploring the city of Hamilton. Before going into further detail, we want to explain how we arrived at working on a documentary and why the city of Hamilton is important to the field of globalization studies. As Globies, we are a new generation of academics exploring the shift of the social sciences into interdisciplinary studies. These studies have taught us about the issues of temporality, citizenship, political economy, biopolitics, the importance of critical pedagogy, and forming issues around social justice. We have taken classes from the field of political science, social work, cultural studies, labor studies, and communications studies. On a broader scale, we are also exploring questions surrounding the city as a new space of governmentality in a global era.
One thing that we've come across being interdisciplinary students and being able to take classes in various departments is the use of film as a critical medium to bridge the gap between the academic world and the general public. The benefits of film are that it's accessible and it can deliver and expose ideas in ways that text cannot. Throughout the broad range of courses that we've taken, we've both noticed a strong focus on audio-visual materials to supplement the course readings. So this is part of the reasoning that we chose to make a documentary.
Part of our documentary is to really explore, as we said before, the city as a new space of governmentality in a global era. We're seeing all over the world trends of local to global, and cities as a new space of governmentality. While it's important to recognize these on a global scale, we realize that at McMaster, as students, we owe a greater service to the community at large and influence how politics shapes local and global right here in our own backyard.
And we find Hamilton to be an exceptional example of the city as a new space of governmentality because it is a shining example of the ways that the global has affected the local. So one thing we want to do is track the sort of fall of the steel industry through neoliberal policies and globalization.
We also have 6 main points of investigation within this documentary. As said before by both Leila and I, cities as a new space of governmentality. We also want to look at unemployment and the political economy of Hamilton, citizenship, civil society, social cohesion, and community engagement.
Environmentalism, immigration, and gender. And one thing that we also want to look into is the idea of art is the new steel, which is something that the city is promoting to sort of promote arts and culture industries as the new industries that will thrive.
Within the documentary, we plan on exploring many different populations within the city of Hamilton, from other local students to politicians, social justice activists, those living ODSP recipients,
those with living experience with poverty, as well as members of local initiatives and grassroots organizations to reduce poverty in Hamilton.
Some of the sample interview questions we'll be asking are things like, how has globalization affected Hamilton? What does it mean to be a citizen of Hamilton? Exploring kind of the roots between economic versus social citizenship.
How has poverty in Hamilton affected your daily life? And how do you see issues of poverty connecting with broader processes of globalization? So one thing that we want to look into with our documentary is we want to go further than just exposing poverty and looking at the poverty that already exists, because we feel these questions have already been asked, and we want to examine and build on the already broad and present research on poverty and poverty reduction. So one thing that we want to do is break down the poverty phenomena, and that's where our 6 components come in, which we mentioned earlier. So we really want to sort of find out what are the components that are causing poverty and allowing it to thrive in a place such as Hamilton, and how do the global ideas affect the local people on the ground.
One of our major insights through our research and investigation with the Hamilton community has been a mass amount of research coming from the Hamilton Poverty Roundtable for poverty reduction. And recently there was a speaker from the Calgary Poverty Initiative, a quote that he said on poverty in communities.
So the quote is, "What does poverty do to our communities? Kind of, so what? Well, of course there is the moral issue. We don't want poverty in our communities because it is not right, and that's true. But we don't want it because it creates a bunch of other things that we don't want in our communities. Things like domestic violence and addiction, higher rates of mental illness, lower rates of trust. Things that we care about in our communities inherently. And poverty eats away at them and creates all these negative things, and it is modern urbanism that is creating poverty." And so one thing that we want to look at, and again that quote is Dan Mead's, and one thing we want to look at is, how is modernism contributing to poverty? Because we do know that obviously it's existed before modern urbanism. but that's going to be sort of our globalization angle.
And also realizing some of the statistical facts that for the first time in history, a majority of the world's population resides in urban areas. For a long time, globalization studies has been primarily focused around the state. But within modern urbanism, there's this new sense of governmentality, social justice activism, grassroots social movements, and civil society happening within urban and regional areas. So it's no longer citizenship of the state, but exploring the complexities of citizenship having multi-dimensions, one being that of a citizenship of your city or local community.
And one thing we also want to look at is if industry is going to thrive in Hamilton. And so Hamilton After Steel is trying to find sort of industry that is going to be its main building block. And they're pushing for art, but we want to look at sort of the barriers that come with building any industry when a large portion of your population is living in poverty. So how can anything really thrive when 20% of the population is living in poverty? And that statistic is according to the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction.
And I guess before we wrap up, we'll just quickly cap some of the research we've done thus far. We've gone to a couple local events looking at issues from the local 1005 steelworkers. We've also been active within supporting the student movement protests in Quebec. Last week we were at a great rally with hundreds of others, students and local activists supporting Quebec student solidarity. It's a movement we see as very important to looking at these new spaces of governmentality. As well, been to Slut Walk in Toronto to see how other activism is happening on the ground and the importance of local community activism and changing not only policy but local communities. And we also went to, on Saturday,
we attended Brews and Bands at the Casbah, which is a local initiative to sort of build the local economy up by exposing and supporting local talent. So it was craft beer and local musicians, all from Southern Ontario. And it was a very, very successful event, a great way to sort of show Hamiltonians investing in their own economy.
And kind of digging into our sixth point of investigation is Art the New Steel. And that's something that we're taking with a critical perspective, realizing that there's many complexities to the steel industry, but also looking at the importance of art within development of community, citizenship, and participation in all civil forms of life.
And so tomorrow, actually, we are meeting with Mark Chamberlain, who is the former chair of the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. And we are going to be doing our interview with him on film tomorrow, and he seems to have a lot of great insights. We're excited to find out what he's got to say. Yeah, that's our progress so far.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that with us. Did you want to mention your social networking type of stuff?
Yeah, of course. So as part of the project, we feel that social media plays an important role with social justice activism and reaching out to broader communities and different networks of communication. We have a Twitter site as well as a
WordPress website. So you guys can find us online at www.thisishamilton.wordpress.com.
And also on Twitter as thisishamilton1. We look forward to your suggestions and influence.
My name is Shawn Pittman, and my topic deals with the ongoing global land grab, or the large-scale buying and leasing of agricultural land in developing countries by private investors, food insecure countries, and other actors. This topic interests me because of the sheer scale of the land grab. Between 2000 and 2010, land deals under consideration or negotiation worldwide amounted to over 203 million hectares, equivalent to over 8 times the size of the United Kingdom. In many of these land deals, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of rural subsistence farmers are being dispossessed of their land. When Marx first conceived the idea of the enclosure of the commons, all of those who were dispossessed created a landless working class. They were able to provide their labor to new industries, However, these land deals are completed to develop large-scale industrialized agriculture, large plantations. And these farms have a very low land-to-worker ratio, so little or no jobs are being created to support those who are dispossessed. This topic is very pressing because those who are dispossessed are unable to farm, common lands where food was once found is also cleared for development, and virtually no jobs or opportunities are created out of these deals. My initial research plan was to survey land grabbing in an effort to identify the key actors, whether they are private actors, domestic elites, sovereign wealth funds, or other forms of investors, and what drivers were allowing land grabbing to continue. As my research progressed, I discovered that the majority of current work on the topic was this sort of cataloging of land grabbing, identifying the actors, companies, host governments involved, the size and scope of the deals, and statistics on who is being affected. What is lacking is a theoretically grounded analysis of the power relations active in global land grabbing. So my focus has shifted to consider how can we make sense of the power relations of land deals? How are they created, understood, and transformed? And what is the fate of those who are dispossessed of their land? Having provided this context, the title of my project is Villagization in Gambella, the Biopolitics of Dispossession. Biopolitics, as first outlined by Foucault, refers to the management of populations through the use of statistics, health policies, and other measures that are more indirect than the use of force and coercion, which Foucault envisioned as a shift from the power over life and death to the power to make live or let die. My essay will focus on the Gambella region of Ethiopia, where there is an ongoing villagization program. This is a state-orchestrated, forced relocation of hundreds of thousands of rural peasants in the Gambella region. My analysis will show how villagization serves the interest of capital accumulation as a clear example of a let-die intervention as conceived by Foucault. While coercion is still present, villagization also rests heavily on a more indirect deployment of power, involving promises of benefits to the displaced population that are reliant on long-term contracts that conceal the emptiness of these promises. The affected populations also face a temporal and spatial disconnect between dispossession and the absorption of surplus rural workers. The new villages lack arable land, access to infrastructure and basic services. So instead of improving life, the villagization program is denying life to the point of death. It is important to recognize and critically analyze the subtlety of these power relations, since they have implications for the way in which power operates in the global land grab, as well as for resistance to this power. I have recently submitted an abstract of this paper for consideration in the Global Land Grabbing 2 conference, hosted by the Land Deal Politics Initiative, and this conference will take place October 17th to 19th, 2012, at Cornell University. This is a follow-up to the highly successful 2011 conference, and at that conference, 120 papers were presented that sketched the broad outlines of land grabs happening across the globe. The stated purpose of the 2012 conference is to deepen and broaden our understanding of contemporary land deals. So it is my hope that by looking at the governance of land deals through the lens of biopolitics, as outlined by Foucault, that this project will help provide a deeper understanding of the power relations active in global land grabbing.
Segments of this piece were hosted by Shawn Pittman. Editing and post-production, perhaps the most important element of a radio show, were done by Mola Shahasavari, and special thanks to Allie Crowder, Leila Mash, Nicole Rallis, and Sean Pittman, and all of our other colleagues at the Institute on Globalization and Human Condition. I'm Doran Hodge. Thanks for listening, and that's our show for this week. Please remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/globalbeatcfmu, and follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/globalbeat_CFMU. We'd love to hear from you. See you next Wednesday morning on Global Beat Radio.